In 1958, the United States government was, they were so terrified of the Soviet Union launching the Sputnik satellite, they effectively weaponized public school counselors.
Yeah, weaponized is, it's really the right word for it.
Right. Congress just poured millions of dollars into guidance programs. And this wasn't to, help students deal with teenage angst or anything.
Not at all.
It was to actively mine the student population for math and science geniuses, like kids who could help America win the space race. So, okay, let's unpack this.
It's a wild piece of history.
It really is. Because when you, the listener, picture a counselor or a therapist today, you probably don't think of a Cold War intelligence asset.
Definitely not. You think of a quiet room.
Exactly. You think of a cryo room, someone nodding thoughtfully on a couch, helping you process your feelings.
Right.
But the stack of sources we are diving into today, which is this really comprehensive look at the historical appendices and epilogues of the counseling profession, it reveals that therapy is not, and will never has been, an insulated practice.
No, it's deeply connected to everything else going on.
Right. It's a highly dynamic tool that's been constantly molded by government mandates, economic collapses, and just massive societal shocks.
Yeah, it functions almost like a societal barometer, really.
That societal barometer. I like that.
Thanks. And, the goal today isn't to just recite a timeline of when different counseling theories were invented. We want to synthesize the underlying mechanisms of why this profession had to constantly mutate just to survive.
Right. The why is what's important.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that counseling didn't begin as a medical discipline. It didn't start in a sterile hospital ward or a university psychology lab.
Where did it start then?
It was born as a really desperate humanitarian response to the absolute chaos of the Industrial Revolution.
Wow. And, as we dig into that chaos, it is worth noting up front that the historical record we're looking at runs straight through some highly charged political events.
Oh, heavily charged.
Yeah. We are talking about the Vietnam War, civil rights legislation, immigration policies, major healthcare reform.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does.
Yeah.
And I just want to say to you listening, we are strictly looking at the raw data in these sources to understand the cause and effect on the profession itself.
Right, just the history.
Exactly. We are simply tracing the mechanics of history here, not taking a side on the politics of it.
Which is vital because to understand those mechanics, you have to look objectively at the late 1800s and early 1900s.
The Industrial Revolution era.
Yeah. The social fabric of the United States was tearing. People were abandoning agrarian life. They were flocking to these densely packed cities to work in factories.
It's a massive shift in how people lived.
Absolutely. And the overarching concept of getting, advice from your village elders, it just no longer worked. The economy was way too complex for that.
So who steps in to fix that?
Well, out of this friction, Frank Parsons emerges in 1908, and he founds Boston's Vocational Bureau.
Right, Parsons. Reading the material on him, he comes across less like a modern therapist and more like an early human algorithm.
A human algorithm. That's a highly accurate assessment, actually.
Because long before computers, it seems like he was just trying to solve this massive macroeconomic problem by matching data points.
He really was.
Yeah.
Parsons pioneered what we now call the trait factor approach. He theorized that choosing a vocation required 3 very strict variables.
Okay, what were they?
First, a brutally honest inventory of your own traits, so your aptitudes, your limits, your cognitive abilities.
Like a personal audit.
Exactly. Then second, a comprehensive mapping of the job market, like what the factory work actually demands and what it pays.
Okay, makes sense. And the third?
Third is true reasoning to synthesize those 2 data sets. You measure the exact shape of a person's skills, and you find the exact hole in the industrial economy where they fit.
Wow. So it was essentially just a staffing mechanism.
Pretty much, yeah.
And right alongside him, you have Jesse B. Davis applying a very similar pragmatism, but to the public school system.
Right, the early school guidance programs.
Yeah, but Davis didn't bring in psychologists. He suggested that English teachers should be the ones to teach guidance once a week to build moral character.
Which is so interesting.
It is. It was entirely about preventative civic engineering.
Because the concept of a counselor just didn't exist yet. These early pioneers viewed themselves as interdisciplinary social reformers.
But that paradigm kind of fractures pretty quickly, right?
It does. It fractures the exact same year Parsons opens his bureau, all because of a man named Clifford Beers.
Ah, Clifford Beers.
Yeah. Beers was a former Yale student who suffered from severe depression, and he was institutionalized. And he publishes this devastating expose in 1908 called A Mind That Found Itself.
And that book was about the asylums, right?
Yes. It detailed the horrific, abusive conditions inside mental asylums at the time, and this just ignites the modern mental health
Oh,
movement.
wait, this is where the timeline and the sources seems to contradict itself a bit.
How
Well, you have Parsons and Davis operating what are essentially pragmatic job placement and character building programs.
All right.
Then you have Beers advocating for people suffering from profound psychiatric trauma. I mean, trying to fit a deeply depressed person into a factory job isn't therapy.
No, it's not.
That's just a staffing agency ignoring the real problem.
Hmm.
So how did these completely opposite philosophies not just tear this brand new field apart?
It's a great question. It actually created a structural tension that defines the profession to this very day.
Really?
A tension.
Yeah. You had two parallel tracks. One was the objective scientific attempt to measure human productivity, and the other was the passionate humanitarian drive to relieve psychological suffering.
And they just coexisted.
More than that, instead of destroying the field, that tension became its engine. Counselors had to constantly straddle the line between keeping people economically viable and, well, keeping them mentally whole.
That is a tough tightrope to walk. And nothing tests that tension quite like a global crisis, which we see moving into the 1910s when World War I breaks out. Oh, massive catalyst for change.
Yeah, the military suddenly has a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
They need to process and assign hundreds of thousands of recruits. So they commission the Army Alpha and Beta tests.
Right.
And for the first time, counseling gets infused with psychometrics.
Let's define psychometrics for a second because it changes absolutely everything.
These do.
It is the science of measuring mental capacities and processes. The military needed a fast, scalable way to quantify intelligence.
Because they had so many people to sort through.
Exactly. So the Army Alpha was for literate recruits, and the Beta was for illiterate or non-English speaking recruits. And suddenly, guidance wasn't just a philosophical conversation anymore.
It had hard data.
Right. It had the backing of hard statistical data. It legitimized the profession in the eyes of the government.
But it also seems to narrow the focus entirely onto testing. Though the sources do show a brief broadening in the 1920s, like the first marriage and family counseling center opens in New York by Abraham and Hannah Stone.
Which was a big step for family dynamics.
Definitely. But then the 1930s hit, the Great Depression, the global economy collapses, and we get the first official theory of counseling from E.G. Williamson. The Minnesota point of view?
Yes, Williamson.
And this is a ruthlessly directive trait factor approach.
It was an evolution of Parsons' early matching system, but much, much more authoritative.
Like how authoritative?
Well, Williamson believed the counselor's job was to act almost like a physician diagnosing a disease. You ascertain the client's deficiency, like a lack of a specific skill or knowledge, and you prescribe the exact procedure to rectify it.
So the counselor's just calling the shots.
Exactly. The counselor is the absolute authority in the room.
I have to push back on this because diagnosing a life choice and giving an order that goes against everything we understand about therapy today.
It really does.
Right. If a client is deeply lost, telling them, you have these skills, go apply for this job, isn't addressing their mental health. It's just a boss giving an order.
I see what you're saying.
Didn't they realize they were abandoning the humanitarian empathy that Clifford Beers fought for?
They realized it, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the socioeconomic reality of the 1930s.
Meaning the Depression.
Exactly. When people are standing in breadlines and families are literally starving, deep psychological exploration is a luxury.
Oh, I see. You can't process childhood trauma if you can't eat.
Right. Williamson's directive approach was a survival mechanism. The American public needed immediate, actionable solutions to avoid poverty. Context dictates the method.
Wow, okay. Which perfectly explains the massive whiplash the profession experiences in the 1940s.
Oh, total whiplash.
Yeah. World War II forces millions of women into the workforce, fundamentally rewriting traditional gender roles. Then the war ends, the economy booms, and suddenly people aren't just trying to survive.
Right, the context shifted completely.
They have the luxury of seeking personal freedom. And enter Carl Rogers in 1942.
A monumental figure.
It's huge. Now, I know most of you listening are probably familiar with Carl Rogers and his client-centered therapy, where the counselor acts as a non-judgmental mirror.
Yes.
But looking at the historical context, his theory wasn't just a new technique. It was a total rejection of the economic-driven model.
It was, and it caused massive friction within the establishment. Rogers argued that the directive approach was arrogant and ultimately ineffective for true human development.
So he completely flipped the power dynamic.
Exactly. He proposed that the client is the ultimate authority on their own life. If you provide an environment of unconditional positive regard, the client will naturally reorganize their own personality and find their own solutions.
But I can see why that would enrage the old guard.
Oh, they hated it.
I bet.
Yeah.
Because if a client is self-destructive or society needs them to fill a specific economic role, simply mirroring them and letting them find their own way seems, well, dangerously passive to those older theorists.
It threatened the whole infrastructure.
And it's the exact opposite of what the government wanted. Which brings us back to that 1958 Sputnik moment we talked about at the start.
Right. The space race panic.
The government clearly didn't want counselors just exploring feelings. They wanted them mining for resources. The National Defense Education Act was purely transactional.
The NDEA perfectly illustrates how funding dictates focus. By tying federal dollars to the identification of scientifically talented students, the government quadrupled the number of school counselors in less than a decade.
Quadrupled? That's insane.
It is. It cemented counseling into the American educational infrastructure. But it also proved that whoever holds the purse strings gets to dictate what a counselor actually does.
And those purse strings get violently yanked in the 1960s and 70s.
Yes, they do.
The culture undergoes massive upheavals. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the women's movement.
So much systemic change all at once.
Yeah, you can't just sit in a quiet room and mirror a client when their entire community is being drafted or denied basic rights. Counselors are forced out of the office and into the streets.
And this is where they see the mechanisms of systemic change alter the day-to-day reality of a counselor. The Community Mental Health Centers Act of 1963 established localized centers.
Meaning they were out in the neighborhoods.
Exactly, meaning counselors were suddenly dealing directly with the fallout of skyrocketing divorce rates, widespread drug addiction, and severe societal trauma.
They couldn't rely on one-on-one sessions anymore, could they?
No, the volume was way too high. Group counseling becomes a primary, necessary method.
We also see legislation like Title IX fundamentally altering the landscape in the 70s.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just about funding women's sports, which is how we usually think of it. It forced educational institutions to actively dismantle gender-based discrimination.
Right.
Meaning counselors suddenly had a legal mandate to address systemic inequality in schools. This gives rise to the community counselor, a multidimensional professional juggling educational, societal, and psychological roles.
But as their responsibilities expanded, they faced an existential threat.
What was that?
Anyone could print a business card and call themselves a counselor. There were no boundaries.
Oh, wow. Literally anyone.
Literally anyone. So in 1976, Virginia becomes the first state to adopt a professional counselor licensure law.
The sources show a bizarre timeline with this, noting that California was the absolute last state to pass a licensure law, dragging their feet until around 2009.
Yeah, 2009, it took a long time.
But why does licensure actually matter to you, the listener? I mean, it just sounds like bureaucratic infighting.
It sounds like it, but it matters because of survival, specifically against the medical establishment and insurance companies.
Oh, the money side of things.
Always the money. Without a state-sanctioned license, a counselor cannot get a billing code. If you cannot bill insurance, your clients have to pay entirely out of pocket.
Which immediately restricts your services to only the wealthy.
Exactly. Licensure wasn't about prestige. It was about ensuring the profession didn't get crushed out of the healthcare market by psychiatrists and social workers who were already legally recognized.
That perfectly frames the chaos of the 1980s and 90s. The texts are filled with what looks like an exhausting alphabet soup of organizational name changes.
It is a lot of acronyms.
So many.
Yeah.
The APGA becomes the ACD, and then finally in 1992, they unify as the ACA, the American Counseling Association.
Right.
It's easy to read that as tedious administrative trivia. But through the lens of survival, they were building a massive, unified lobbying front.
Yes, a united front.
They needed a single, powerful union to fight for their slice of the healthcare pie.
Precisely. And they established rigorous educational standards like case rep to prove to the government and insurance companies that their master's and doctoral programs produced highly trained empirical professionals.
So it wasn't just talk therapy anymore, it's standardized.
Right. But while they were solidifying their political power, the actual clinical theories were undergoing a radical paradigm shift. The 1980s introduced a heavy focus on human development across the lifespan, significantly influenced by feminist theory.
The text highlights Carol Gilligan's work in 1982. She challenged the foundational models of moral development.
She did, because those models had historically been constructed almost entirely by men, studying men.
Which leaves out half the population.
Exactly. Gilligan's work, alongside the rising mandate for multicultural competencies, shifted the blame away from the individual patient's brain.
What do you mean by shifted the blame?
Well, prior to this, if a client was struggling, the assumption was an internal deficit, like something is wrong with you.
Ah, okay.
But the feminist and multicultural theories introduced the mechanism of systemic friction. It formally recognized that a client's depression or anxiety might be a completely rational response to an oppressive environment, poverty, or systemic discrimination.
That makes so much sense.
You cannot treat the mind without treating the context.
Which brings us right to the doorstep of the 21st century.
The modern era.
Yeah. By the time we hit the 2000s, the profession has its unified lobbying body, it has its state licenses, and it recognizes systemic trauma. But then the modern world hits them with unprecedented crises.
Very dark times.
Yeah, the texts specifically point to the 9/11 attacks and the rise of school shootings like Columbine and Virginia Tech.
The sheer scale of these events required a pivot toward specialized crisis management.
Because it wasn't just everyday stress anymore.
Right. The focus heavily shifted to understanding acute stress disorder, or ASD, and its relationship to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, PTSD.
The clinical mechanism here is crucial. Counselors realize that trauma is a normal response to an abnormal situation. But if you don't intervene during the acute phase, those first few weeks after a disaster, the trauma hardens into long-term PTSD.
So they are dealing with these incredibly complex, deeply rooted traumas. But simultaneously, they are losing control of how they treat them.
Because of managed care.
Right, the insurance companies. The way it's described in the texts, it's less like providing health care and more like trying to fit a dense, complex novel into a Twitter character limit.
That's a great way to put it.
Counselors have to compress a client's profound grief or trauma into, like, 6 pre-approved sessions linked to a highly specific diagnostic billing code.
Yeah.
And if the client's suffering doesn't fit the spreadsheet, the funding is cut. It sounds like they have to play a game of chess with insurance companies.
It creates a brutal ethical dilemma. Managed care pushes the field toward a medical, often medication-heavy model because it's statistically faster and cheaper than long-term relationship-based therapy.
Fast and cheap over actual healing.
Exactly. Counselors are forced to assign a severe psychiatric label to a client very early on just to ensure they get reimbursed.
Oh, wow.
And this heavily stigmatizes the client, remaining on their medical record permanently.
That is awful.
This raises an important question, right? It challenges the very core of what the profession built over a century. How do you foster long-term human wellness when your methods are dictated by corporate profit margins?
It's an agonizing position to be in, and it only gets more complicated when you introduce the internet.
Cyber counseling.
Right. The text breaks down the rise of cyber counseling using telehealth to provide therapy. Now, for you, the listener, if you've ever used a telehealth app, the convenience is obvious.
It's incredibly convenient.
But the sources outline how this technology completely outpaced the ethical and legal boundaries of the profession.
The risks are structural. First, you lose the subtle nonverbal cues, the shift in posture, the micro-expressions, the tapping of a foot.
Stuff you'd only notice in person.
Right. For a counselor, that is vital clinical data.
Yeah.
Second, there are massive jurisdictional and emergency protocol issues.
Like what?
Well, if a counselor in New York is speaking via video to a client in rural Texas, and that client expresses a clear intent to harm themselves, how does the counselor intervene?
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that.
They don't know the local authorities, they don't have physical access, and the crisis is playing out across state lines.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And this friction between technology and geography, it ties directly into the future trends the text highlights for 2017 and beyond.
Yes, the biopsychosocial approach.
Right. The field is moving toward a biopsychosocial approach. And let's break that down because it's not just a buzzword. It's the practical realization that a client's depression might be linked to their gut biome, the biological their cognitive framing, the psychological, and their lack of a safe, walkable neighborhood,
Right.
the social.
All intertwined.
You have to treat all three as one unified system.
And treating the social environment heavily involves the immigration crisis.
Yes, the text mentions that.
The texts point out there are over 38 million immigrants in the U.S., with an estimated 11 million who are undocumented. The chronic physiological stress caused by precarious legal status, prejudice, and a total lack of basic services is immense.
It's an entire population under severe strain.
Absolutely. Modern counselors are mandated to advocate for these populations impartially, recognizing that immigration policy is a massive public health variable.
We also see the federal government finally treating counselors as top-tier assets again.
How so?
Well, the 2015 National Defense Authorization Act integrated licensed counselors into the TRICARE program, and the VA Choice program expanded veteran access to them.
That's a huge shift.
It really is. It's full circle. The military that used them to administer intelligence tests in World War I is now relying on them as independent practitioners to handle the complex trauma of modern warfare.
It is the ultimate validation of their long fight for legitimacy. I mean, they evolved from giving pragmatic vocational advice in a Boston basement to operating autonomously within the largest healthcare systems on the planet.
It's incredible to see how the definition of therapy has stretched. But, as we look at all these massive systemic changes, there's one detail from the sources that perfectly captures the ongoing absurdity of bureaucracy trying to manage human needs.
Oh, license portability.
Yes, the issue of license portability.
It is a striking contradiction.
Explain that for the listener.
Well, we live in a freely transient world, heavily connected by cyber counseling. Yet, because licensure is handled state by state, a counselor who is fully qualified, highly trained, and legally permitted to help a client in one state loses all legal authority to practice the moment they drive their car across a state border.
It makes no sense.
It really doesn't. Their education and empathy didn't vanish, but their legal right to help someone did.
It's a wild thought to leave on. The idea that healing is geographically bound by an imaginary line on a map.
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. When you realize that a bureaucratic border can stop a therapy session, it crystallizes everything we've uncovered today. Counseling isn't just a leather couch in a quiet room. It is a massive, fiercely evolving mechanism that has to constantly fight insurance companies, navigate government mandates, and adapt to technological revolutions, all while trying to hold up a mirror to the complex human sitting on the other side of the screen.
Very well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning and keep learning.